Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on the video. Today we're going to take a look at Timeshift. This is going to be a deep dive into the Timeshift program. Timeshift is a utility that takes snapshots of the state of your Linux operating system, and then it will allow you to restore to that state at a later date should you want to do so. It is very similar in functionality to the System Restore feature in Windows, and there is also a feature that works kind of the same way in Mac as well. Time Capsule would be one of those programs that does that. This is something that we've really kind of been lacking in the Linux world, is a way to conveniently just restore the system, mainly because most people who work with Linux are very familiar with the system, and Linux, unlike other operating systems, can be reinstalled and set up. You can get back to where you were if you have a good backup in 20 minutes. So some people may even argue that this is not necessary. But for new users that aren't really that well versed with keeping up with the system, or if you are in a situation where you are administering a bunch of systems, it's really easy just to have this program running in the background, and if somebody calls you up and says, oh, I made a mistake, I installed some bad software, the drivers got messed up, whatever the deal is, as an administrator you can tell them to open up this program and restore to last week, and then everything's just hunky-dory fine, and tell them not to do that same thing again. So from that point of view, this is a very useful program. And I participated in the writing of a program over the last year that does exactly the same thing that this program does. The one that I worked on is called CYA, and I was working with Jeremy O'Connell at CyberWeb Solutions. Jeremy did all of the writing of the actual code. I was just a tester and suggester, and I was helping him along to try and get the workflow of the program worked out and that sort of thing. So I'm very familiar with how these programs work, and I've probably talked about it more than I should have in past videos, but people said you really need to do a video exclusively about this, so that's what we're going to do. Now, the way this video is going to work is we're going to start out by showing all of the nice pointy clicky features. We're going to set it up, and we're going to do that. And then I'm going to talk about working with Timeshift from a command line a little bit, and we'll talk about documentation, we'll talk about the developer, and we'll just really take a deep dive into it. And also I'll show you kind of how this is doing what it's doing and where it is putting the stuff when it does the backup and that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and get started. What I have here is another machine ready to rock and roll, and this machine has Timeshift installed, but it is not fully completely configured yet. If you are starting with Linux Mint 18.3, you just installed it, then this is what you would need to do. You go ahead and open up your menu and do a search for Timeshift. Just typing in time will work fine. It's going to ask for your password, because you do have to have administrator privileges. Now, if you have never, ever run Timeshift before, then the first thing that's going to pop up is the wizard. You're not going to see that. You're going to see the wizard. So let's start with the wizard. And this is just to kind of walk you through the initial setup. So the first thing it asks you here is whether you are going to be doing an rsync or Btrfs snapshot type. Now, if you don't know what that is, that refers to rsync is a tool that moves data around from one Linux system to another. Very, very powerful tool. It's just basically copies stuff from, from directory to directory, or even from computer to computer if you use it the right way. That is going to work with the ext4 file system that Linux Mint installs by default. However, if you have a hard drive somewhere that has Btrfs on it, or if your system is set up with Btrfs, this particular program will let you do Btrfs snapshots. Btrfs is a file system that works with your hard drive, and it is an advanced file system for Linux that has a lot of features in it. It's also quite new, and it's very unstable. So when you install Linux Mint, it automatically defaults to the more standard, stable ext4 file system, and I personally wouldn't use any other file system on a desktop or a laptop computer at this point because it's pretty much bulletproof. Now that we've got that out of the way and you've chosen rsync, which will be the default anyway, we can move to the next thing. The next thing it's going to ask you is what device you want to have your snapshots stored on. Now you notice it's not asking for paths here. It's not saying that you can put it somewhere in your home directory or something like that. It's concerned with devices, which means that if your computer has more than one hard drive in it, it will default to the one that's the furthest away from where the system lives. On this particular machine, we have two partitions on the same drive. And the first partition is the home system, which is SDA1, and then SDA, or rather the operating system. SDA3 is the home directory. That is the home partition. And so therefore it is defaulted to that because it is a partition away from the system. If you install Linux Mint and use the automatic option in the installer, it just creates one big happy partition and it puts your home directory and all of the system directories all in there side by side. In that case, Timeshift will just default to using that device. If you have an external hard drive, you may plug it in before you launch Timeshift or any time after you have started Timeshift, and you may tell Timeshift that it can put snapshots on that device. In that case, you will have to run Timeshift after you've plugged the device in and do it manually. But there's actually, there's some functionality there. I think one of the big advantages to Timeshift is that it's automatic, so that's not the way I would use it. I would use another backup tool to do that, like XBT or the backup tool that's included with Linux Mint. I think it would do a better job, but that's just my opinion, and you feel free to play with it all you want to. Now, here we are going to choose what kind of backups we're going to make. And usually daily is highlighted when you go to this, but it's not here because I've kind of removed all of the different configuration files to get it back to just the base install. So in this case, we will choose daily, we're going to choose weekly and monthly. Now, in the videos I've done about this before, I said something like, oh, I was doing one monthly and then I was going to do two. It was going to be like 1, 2, 3 here. I have since been schooled on the concept of the M+1 backup. I have a very good friend of mine who builds data centers and works with servers all the time, and he explained to me that the default setting here is an M+1, and that's the one that I should probably be using. Now, you can do whatever you want with it. You can have it take a snapshot every time the computer boots. You can have it take a snapshot hourly, which means that every hour it's going to take a snapshot. I think that's a little bit of overkill. Then you have it where it will do it daily and weekly and monthly. So that way you will have 2 monthlies, you will have 3 weeklies, so you'll have the last 4 weeks at any given time once this thing gets all caught up, and then you'll have a month before that, and then you'll have the last 5 days at any given time. So that way that gives you a lot of choices of snapshots to choose from, because you may discover that, well, my system worked fine last week. Well, don't worry about the dailies, jump back to last week. It all depends on how it goes. So we'll choose that when we'll say next, which is just the defaults. And then we get some instructions here, and it kind of explains a little bit about what it's doing. And then we finish. Now we come back and we've got the system set up here. So let's go ahead and take a snapshot. And if I didn't do anything to it at all right now, I closed the program and went on about my day and kept using Linux Mint, it would take care of every bit of this in the background. It has already scheduled the jobs. They're going to run at the appropriate times. You wouldn't have to touch this. You could forget about it and never open it again, and then until you needed it, and then hopefully everything would be working the way it's supposed to, and then when you need it, you would be able to do the restoration. So let's go ahead and create one manually, though, just to show you how this works. The first time it takes a snapshot, it takes it quite some time. It will take it 5 to 10 minutes to copy all of the data that it is going to put in the Timeshift directory in the home directory in this case. And the next time that it does it, it will only take it just a minute or two because it's only saving changes. So let's go ahead and start our snapshot, and it's going to go through and it's going to go ahead and do this, and we'll pause the video and let it get finished. It takes it probably about 5 minutes or so to do this. Timeshift is finished creating the snapshot. The actual time for that was probably about 5 minutes or so. So the snapshot is marked as being on demand because it has not created. That's what that tag stands for. O, on demand. We can add a comment here. So let's just, we'll give it something real simple. We'll just call it first. That way we know what it is. And so we have our snapshot in place. And the next thing I'm going to show you is how to restore. But before we move on to that, a couple of things that I want to point out here. First of all, this works only with systems that have a pretty standard setup for storage. If you are using a RAID-based system and you are using a RAID mapper, it has absolutely no idea what it's looking at. So unless your RAID controller is seen as a physical device where it's listed as like SDA, 1 or something like that, it doesn't know what it's looking at. So it can't look past, the devices to see things like RAID arrays or anything like that, block storage devices. Also, if you have a NAS hooked up to your system, I had one fellow who said that he was having a great deal of difficulty with Timeshift because it was trying to follow the link to his NAS and copy about 3 or 4 terabytes worth of stuff, and that wasn't going to fly, and then he had to kill the process, and it was big mess. So Timeshift works best if you are only working with a very simple system that has a pretty standard setup. That's something to keep in mind. So the other thing to talk about here is the fact that Timeshift, when it creates another snapshot, will take much less time to do so because it only saves the changes. The first time around, it copies every single file that is in every single system directory. And then the next time, it looks for what has changed since the last snapshot, which in most cases is only a few megabytes of data. So it would only take it about 30 seconds to actually run. But in doing that, as it creates snapshots, what it's really building is a giant link farm. And where it's putting all these links is in your home directory in this case, because we have told it to use the home partition. So if we take a look into the file system here, and we open up home, we see we have a directory here called Timeshift, and I can kind of poke around in here. So the first snapshot that we took is right there. There it is. Now, when it goes to take a daily or monthly or these different ones here, what it's going to do is it's going to create links. So this whole thing becomes a giant link farm, and all the files are only in there once. So the only thing it actually changes a separate copy of, or it only records the changes. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So if you had version 1.1 in the original snapshot, and by the time the next snapshot came along, you had version 1.2 of a package, an application, then both of those would be stored. But if they remain the same, they wouldn't. Now, this has some advantages. First of all, it takes up a lot less of the file system space there. So, because as we have it configured, we're going to have 8 snapshots before all is said and done. Each one of these snapshots works out to be 8 or 9 gigabytes if they were discrete files, if they were not using hard links to the files. And so therefore, it would get pretty large over time. And so that's an advantage of using that link farm type system. The disadvantage is that files that don't change actually only exist once. So if something does happen and that file gets corrupted, even though you have 8 snapshots, when it goes back to that, it's going to run into the bad data. Whereas if each snapshot was discrete files and they were copies with their own inode in each directory, then what would happen with that is that if one of them got corrupted, then it wouldn't affect the entire linked snapshot system. Hopefully that makes sense. So when we wrote CYA, for instance, we did not use links. We actually made it so that every time that CYA created a snapshot, it made a hard copy of each file that it was backing up. And once you get all of the snapshots into CYA, then it rolls over and it only saves changes once again, but those changes are saved in each snapshot, which has a discrete copy of every file. That is a little bit more secure, a little bit more reliable. In actual practice on a regular desktop or laptop, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. This is an emergency backup program anyway, so yeah, it is what it is. It's kind of like the last resort. I've completely screwed up my system and I need to get back to it. So let's do something to this system to screw it up and then restore it and see if it fixes it. And I will show you how to do the restore from the GUI, the graphic user interface, all pointy and clicky as it may be. So what we're going to do is, let me go ahead and just full screen this so everybody can see what I'm doing. And we are going to let's make the fonts bigger too. We're going to actually just like blow out parts of the system and see if it puts it back. Let's do it that way. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to become the root user or fool the system into thinking we are the root user. Remember that in Ubuntu and Linux Mint and many other distributions, the root user is not actually activated. So we're going to just pretend we're root for a while so we can do some stuff that you really should never do to your system. And so here we go. What I'm going to do is I am going to rf boot. Now what this is going to do is it's going to remove the bootloaders from the system and the kernel too, because that's where the kernel lives. So this machine will really be on borrowed time if I do that. And there it's gone. So we can see if that's gone by just doing this. And do A. Yep, see those links that aren't working? That's because the kernel isn't there and there is no boot directory in there. So if I would reboot this computer right now, this system would not work. It would not boot up at all. So let's bring our Timeshift back. And let's go ahead and do a restore. So we highlight the snapshot that we want to restore and restore it. Just that simple. It asks us to double check some things here. Are we going to put this back on the original device? Yes. We are going to keep the same boot device, absolutely. And we are going to take it from the home directory. So if you had more than one set of snapshots like on an external drive, you could do that here. So we're going to go ahead and take that and say, yes, absolutely, let's do it. And say, yep, go ahead, let's do it. Next, next. Okay, now you notice the screen went blank because it kind of turns the GUI off there so we don't mess with it. Now this will take this system to back this up probably about 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while it's doing it. Alright, so it restored things and now it is booting back up, and since it is booting, we know it worked because we removed the boot directory and removed the kernel as well. So what happens if you have a system that you absolutely cannot boot up? Let's say that happened in real life. You accidentally removed the boot directory and you tried to boot it and it wouldn't boot. Now what do you do? Well, what you would do in that case is you would boot it from the Linux Mint 18.3 live environment. So you'd stick your USB stick in, or you would a DVD if you're using old DVDs, whatever the deal is, and then Timeshift is included there as well. You would type in Timeshift. It would actually scan all of the devices in the computer looking for those snapshots, and when it found it, it would show it, and then you would do the restore process from the live environment. It would once again reboot, and when it rebooted, it would boot back into the system and it would restore. So we know that. I'm not even going to bother to check to see whether those files got put back because we know it happened. The system actually booted up. So that's the basics of how Timeshift works in a nutshell. If you just go but follow the bouncing ball and set this up, then you will have this functionality, and you will have it from the live environment as well, which is a big deal to have it integrated into the system, because installing Timeshift into the live environment from a PPA would be a problem if, let's say that you were using it on Ubuntu, which is where you get it from, because it's not in the Ubuntu repositories for 1710 or 1604. It is integrated into Linux Mint only at this point. So now that we have looked at how to use the GUI, let's talk about a couple of other little things about it, and then we'll move into talking about running it from a command line. So let us jump in here. I did want to point this out. If you go to Settings, you will see here that we have Users. Now what you can do with Timeshift is you can tell it to back up all of the user data for these users. And what it will do is it will include this in the snapshot. Now this might look like a really nice all-in-one backup solution. And if you only have a few, maybe a few gigabytes of data in your home directory, it might work out quite well, especially if you're using an external device. However, if you have a lot of data on your computer, then you're going to want to use a backup program that is going to put that on an external drive. And you're going to want to do those probably manually, or at least another drive in the system. If you have another hard drive in your system, then it would be ideal to go ahead and have Timeshift do the backups there. But still, you want to do an external backup. You can use the XBT tool, which I have talked about on this channel, and if you want to find out more about that, you can go look at the Easy Linux page and look under the bash scripts, and XBT is explained there. Or you could use something like the built-in Mint backup tool. I'm not a big fan of it, but something is better than nothing. Even just dragging and dropping is better than nothing. One of the interesting things about working with backup tools and this particular program is the fact that Timeshift, since it creates that big link farm, is kind of deceiving you by making you think that the snapshots are taking up a smaller amount of space than they actually are, because all of those hard links are in there. A backup program may or may not see those hard links as hard links. Sometimes it will see those as being discrete files with their own inode in each directory, and in that case, then you could be backing up a great deal of data. If you use XBT, XBT now has the feature in 1.6 where it respects hard links. So if your snapshot directory is taking up 10 gigabytes here, it's going to take up 10 gigabytes on your backup media as well. So just something to point out there when you do your backups. Your backup might end up being larger than you thought it was. And of course, if you elected to have this include your user data, it's going to double the size of everything on your computer. Just to keep that in mind. Okay, so let's jump into looking at Timeshift in a terminal. The implementation of Timeshift in a terminal is nothing to write home about. It is not great. And I've actually had a couple of functions that I tested out before I did this video just flat out not work. So I don't really think that the developer intends for you to do a lot with it in a terminal type situation. But it's kind of good to know how to, create a restore point and to restore a restore point from a terminal, simply because of the fact that you may run into a situation where your machine is really messed up and the video drivers don't work, for instance. So the only way that you can get into it is to use a TTY. Hang on, folks. Let's see who's at the door. It was the mailman bringing stuff. Now, where was I? Oh, I don't need to do a search there. Let me out. Thank you. Okay, so what we were talking about was working from a terminal, and Timeshift is not necessarily that great at it. You may run into a situation where you would need to restore from a terminal. Let's say that the only way you could get into your system would be through a TTY. You could always boot from the live environment, but if you're like me, it's kind of nice to know how to not have to go through all that, actually go dig out the USB stick and all that other stuff. So I'm going to show you how to do it. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to figure out how we're going to get some help with Timeshift. And to do that, it's Timeshift and -- help. and then we get a list of stuff here. There is no manual entry for Timeshift. It does not have one. Did I type that incorrect? No, you didn't. You forgot the E. Knew that didn't feel right. So there's no manual. There is also no info page. So it just takes you to the info main menu. So that documentation doesn't come with the program as installed on Linux Mint. There's not a great deal of documentation available on the web page from the developer, Tony George, and we'll look at that at the end of the video. I'll show you where that is. So obviously it's kind of a work in progress, but the main thing that I want to get across here is that this is what we've got to work with. There are several commands listed here, and unfortunately, go away. Thank you. Unfortunately, a few of these that I actually attempted did not work. And the one in particular was removing a specific snapshot. When I did that, the system actually started sucking up a lot of processor time, and it ran and ran and ran and ran and ran, and then when it was done, the snapshot was still there. So I don't know what the deal is with that. But I do know that the create and restore do work. So we're going to look at creating a snapshot. And I'm going to show you how to do, we'll do like a total snapshot here. So let's go ahead and get our text and highlight that, and then we'll put it here. And this will create a snapshot. And I'm just going to call this second to go along with what we did. 2ND. And not at ND, 2ND. Thank you. And we'll leave the tag at D. So what are these tags all about? Well, you can have tags for monthly, weekly, daily. This will be tagged as a daily one, and this will create a snapshot for us. Now, this should go much, much faster than it did the first time around because it's only creating links. Well, it didn't take it. Why not? Well, you have to run it as an administrator. So you can read the help page without being an administrator, but to do this, you have to do that. So let's go ahead and do that. And it's going to create a snapshot. And we'll pause while this is doing this. It shouldn't take too long, though. Okay, the snapshot only took maybe about 30 or 40 seconds to do, and we have the second one in the system. So now let me show you how to restore from the terminal, because that's the next more important thing to know. And just to do that, sudo timeshift --restore. And this is going to put us in an interactive mode. So we'll click restore, and it says, which one of these backups would you like to choose? Well, let's jump back to the first backup again. So we're going to choose number 0. And to restore with default options, press enter for all the prompts. And yes, we want to reinstall the bootloader. That's always a good idea to do. And then it asks us where we're going to put it. The default is going to be SDA for the bootloader there. Yes, absolutely. And then we go ahead and do the restore. Now this time around, you actually have to put the Y in. And it's going to go through that same process that we went through before, and it's going to restart the computer. So I'll come back when it's done and the computer is rebooted. Okay, that only actually took it a couple of seconds because there wasn't that much for it to do, and we're rebooting back into the system yet again. So there you go. That is how you do Timeshift, both from the GUI and from the pointy clicky GUI, let's put it that way, and from a command line. Now you can experiment with those other commands at the command line, but I tried one and it didn't work, which was the, remove the individual snapshot. So obviously a little bit more work has to be done there. Fortunately, the main two commands that you need to know how to do, which would be to create and restore a snapshot, seem to work flawlessly. So there is one more command from the command line which I want to show you, and I also want to show you some other things in the system, because some of you may be quite curious exactly how this thing is pulling this off, and I'll show you how it does its scheduling. once we get to a desktop. And there's our desktop. And we need the terminal back. Go ahead and make that full screen. Make it a little bit bigger for all of us blind people out there that like to have big fonts on the screen. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you is how the scheduling works. And that is where it's actually putting some way to get the computer to do it. The developer of this particular program decided that he would use cron to do this. And so therefore, if you go to, let's see, we'll cd go into this directory and we list it, you see that we have a script in here called Timeshift Hourly. So once every hour the system runs this. It actually runs it at the top of the hour, pretty close to it. And let's see, can we actually look at that script? See what's in there. Yes. So this gets run at the top of the hour. And it is a cron job. And it uses a system called cron that does things at particular times. And it runs Timeshift. And it just sees whether it needs to make a new backup. A new snapshot. It goes ahead and does it. That's the check there. And then scripted, which means however we've got it set up, it goes off and it runs the script. That's it. And it just does it automatically. So every hour that your system is up and running, it's doing that. And that's how he's elected to do it. When we created CYA, we kind of left it open. You can create your own cron job if you like. You could use Anacron, which is a system that does kind of the same thing, but it does it. It's mainly for daily and weekly and monthly things. And the system itself uses that in Ubuntu and Linux Mint and Debian. Any Debian-based system uses Anacron. And I've covered that a little bit in the past. So when we created CYA, we actually provided a Anacron wrapper script for it. But this is how this works. And this should be pretty reliable as long as nothing goes wrong with that particular script that's sitting in the cron.d directory. One last command to show you, and that is probably the one that you use the most. You just pop open a terminal, let's say, and you just want to see how many snapshots you got. Well, you don't have to go find the program. Just Timeshift and then list. And that shows us the snapshots that we have on the machine. It does throw up some errors there because it had something to do with, I think it tries to run it as a GTK program, and then it gets kind of mad and says no. But anyway, the information that you need is down here at the bottom, and it gives you kind of an update of what's going on. It says we have 2 snapshots. We have 42 gigabytes free, and it shows the snapshots that we have taken thus far. They are right there. And if you want to delete snapshots, then you can use the GUI and just go in there and delete them. That's all pretty obvious point and click kind of stuff. So there you go. That is a look at Timeshift, and I have Timeshift running on this machine. This is actually running on every machine that I directly administer at this point. So I have 4 machines running it in the house. I'm not running it on the little CloudBook computer that I talked about in the last video. There's just not enough hard drive space on that thing to make it worthwhile to do that, and that's kind of just a toy setup anyway. My mom's computer runs Linux Mint 18.3 right now. She has Timeshift running, which is really great because when I went through this, I took her through the process of setting up Timeshift so she actually understands what it does. And so if her computer messes up and I can't fix it and she can't get a hold of me, she can always roll back to a restore point from yesterday or last week and get back to where she was. So that's really cool. She understands how to do that. And the point and click nature of Timeshift makes it really great for somebody like me who administers a lot of systems. So therefore, I'm kind of stoked about it. No, it is not perfect. There are some things about this that I don't particularly like, but just from that point and click point of view of running in the background and not having to worry about it and giving you an out and a way to get back to another time when the system was working properly, it's a very good feature to have included in Linux Mint. Of course, if you need more granular control of what's going on here, if you are somebody that has a RAID system, if you have a big NAS hooked up, you need to exclude certain directories, you need to have that sort of granular control, may I offer that you go check out CYA, which is actually just a script. It's not even a program you have to install on the computer, and it works with pretty much any Linux distribution. And I will have the link to the CYA page in the description for this video. I will also put the link for Tony George's page here, TG Tech. This guy works on a lot of great software for Linux, and so therefore you can come here and check it out. And this is his page that he's got up about Timeshift. I'm going to put that in the description, and I'm sure that he would like to hear your suggestions and your feedback as well. So do check it out. Tony did a pretty good job here. I know for a fact that writing a program to do what this program does, this is a very difficult thing to accomplish and to make it work well. Me and Jeremy have described the development of CYA as being a year-long obsessive compulsive disorder fit, an OCD fit, because that's what you have to be, because you have to sit here and you ask yourself these questions. What if, how does this work? Well, what if that's broken? How are we going to deal with that? So I've been through that myself, and so my hat is off to anybody who would attempt to write a program like this. So thank you very much, Tony, for doing so. Great job, and thank you to the Linux Mint project for including this, because I think it adds extra value to Linux Mint, especially for new users who are coming from other systems. They're not really familiar with reinstalling all the time. This makes for a very, very easy way to fix a problem if you should happen to break the system. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a very curious new Linux user who is just exploring the system and likes to poke around and play with things, chances are you will break the system. That's actually part of the rite of passage of learning Linux. If you're not just going to be using it for really basic stuff, you're going to bork up the system at least once. This is great because then you don't have to reinstall. You just roll it back and you've learned your lesson. Don't do that again, right? So anyway, thank you for watching the video, gang. I certainly do appreciate it. I hope I answered everybody's questions. A lot of people have asked questions about Timeshift. I've tried to include them in this video since this is the big deep dive video, and we will do more again soon. Please check out Easy Linux on the web, check out Easy Linux on Facebook, and check out freedompenguin.com for lots of really cool stories about Linux, and a lot of the content from my channel is starting to be syndicated there as well. Thank you, Matt Hartley, for doing that. This video will probably end up there as well at some point, so do check that out. Lots of really cool stuff happening at freedompenguin.com, gang. That is really one cool, hip, happening place to hang out and learn about Linux. So that's it. Thank you for watching. We will do it again soon.